Welcome to another class with Ming. Today we talk about some algebraic rules with radicals. Radicals is like this: square root, for example, usually calls it square root of a square. And we look at this rule number 1 and 2 first. Alright, number 1, part 1, and rule number 1, part 2. But it will be easier to start with rule number 1, part 2. Why does it make sense? Well, you can think of this as having a square, for example. And in this square, the length and the width are both square root of a. For example, square root of a and square root of a. And you ask, what is the area of this square? Well, the area of this square would be square root of a times square root of a. And that is just going to be, well, you know that this answer is going to be a. So square root of a, everything square is just going to be a. Alright, and since square root is the opposite or the inverse of multiplication, or a times a, so if you have a square root of a squared, then basically the square root and the square cancel off each other and you're left with a. Right, so that makes sense. And rule number 2 and rule number 3 basically just mean the square root here can be distributed to two terms that make up of a product, like this: square root of a, square root of b. So for example, if you have square root of 6, then this can be written as 2 times 3 and square root of 2 times square root of 3, for example. And over here, similarly with fraction, so if you have, example, square root of 2 over 3, then this is equal to square root of 2 over square root of 3. So the square root or the radical can be distributed to the terms in the product or in the terms within a fraction. So applying these rules, let's see what can we do with these exercises. This basically means square root of 3 squared. So the square root and the square cancel off, so we are left with 3. Square root of 12. Let's simplify this. Square root of 12 is equal to square root of 4 times 3. That's equal to square root of 4 times square root of 3. Square root of 4 is just 2, so 2 times square root of 3, for example. How about square root of 21? Question 3, square root of 21. Since I have a lot of space here, I'm going to use this space here. Question number 3, square root of 21 is square root of 3 times 7. In this case, it's square root of 3 times square root of 7, for example. And I can't do much with this one, so I leave it as it is. Question number 4, square root of 1 over 16. This is the same as square root of 1 over square root of 16. So that's basically 1 over 4. Square root of 16 is 4, remember that. And the last one is square root of 16 times square root of 16. Square root of 16 square is basically square root of 16 times square root of 16. This is basically, you can see that now, this is the same as square root of 16 square or just 16. Right, I'm doing it that just to show you, this particular step, just to show you that part 1 and part 2 are actually identical. Alright, so one thing to remember is that these rules, if you can simplify it, and remember very carefully that square root of 3, right, if you don't write anything in front, this means this is positive square root of 3. Okay, and if you have square root of 4 like this, then the answer here is just 2, positive number 2. And it is not, for example, this. plus minus 2. That is, this is not the same as this. Right? The only time you get plus minus 2 is when you have something like this. For example, square root minus 4 is equal to 0. For example, when you are solving an equation like this, square root of x squared minus 4 equal to 0. Therefore, x squared in this case is equal to 4. Therefore, x is equal to plus minus square root of 4. So x can be 2 or negative 2. So in this particular case, I have plus minus when you are solving an equation like this. By itself, square root of 4 is positive 2. Right? If you want to write a negative in front of the radical, then you have to write it as, for example, negative square root of 4. For example, in this particular case, then you have negative 2. So be very careful. Alright, as a recap, you need to remember these rules. That is, the square root of a squared is a, and square root of a, everything square, is also a. And that the square root sign or the radical can be distributed to each of the term in the product and each of the term in a fraction. Thank you very much.